Council Planning Committee on Wednesday, the 5th of October 2022. Thank you to members. We have one apology with substitution, that is from Councillor Barker. Councillor Fenton is substituting. Thank you very much. As always, I'm asking at this point whether members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other registerable interest in respect to business on this agenda, of course, if they haven't already done so in advance on the register of interests. No, thank you. Public participation, we have no one registered for public participation at this point. The general remit of the committee. We are, as always, webcasting this meeting, and welcome to those who may be watching this live or at any point in the future. On our plans list for this meeting, we just have item 3A, the vacant site at Eboracum Way. That's pages 1 to 8 of these notes. The erection of a 5-storey apartment building with basement comprising 62 residential units of use class C3 with associated car parking and landscaping works in the Guildhall ward. Can you please introduce this for us?
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan Kenyon, Development Management. So the scheme and the site, the development has permission. It was approved at Planning Committee for 62 apartments subject to a legal agreement, and one of the components of that was 20% affordable housing. The scheme, it's on construction's on site at the moment and it's stalled. We've been in discussions with the developer since December 2020 about viability and deliverability of the scheme. The report is brought to members on the basis that it's a recommendation to vary the legal agreement that we'd signed previously to reduce the contribution towards affordable housing, and it brings it down to 1 million. The report summarises the process that we've been through in terms of we've been to the district valuer on more than one occasion to have a viability reviewed, and we've been to quantity surveyors to verify the costs. In short, the construction costs have gone up significantly to the effect that if we use the viability appraisal process as shown in the MPPF, it's not viable for the developer. However, he's still able and willing to offer 1 million as a planning obligation, and so our recommendation is to allow for the legal agreement to be varied to that effect.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that Mr. Mark Black is present, the developer. Yes. Would you, by all means, come to the table here? The way this works, you have the opportunity to address the committee directly. Normally up to 3 minutes to do that, but then I will invite questions from members around the table. And please, if you've not already done so, press the button so you have a green light on the microphone there.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name's Mark Black. I'm the developer. We acquired the site with planning, and we inherited the section 106. We acquired it just before Corona to do a student site with one of our partners, Torsion Living. Corona hit, Torsion Living lost their funding agreement with Harrison Street, who are a big American fund, and chose not to go forward. We chose to go forward with the student scheme, and halfway through, before a pre-app, we ended up finding out that UTB, who were our main bank, decided that students were not interested. We're concerned, basically, people coming back to the city, well, every city, not just York, and when will Corona end? So we then had to reverse and go back to looking at the scheme that we paid, I think 2.9 million, and from then we're on the back foot. We were doing phase 1, we call it, which is Redness Street, with Toland, Toland Construction, who were a major outfit. We'd agreed a price with Toland to do the development on phase 2. Toland had a major issue on some London development, and suddenly had a massive black hole in their finances, and our bank wouldn't support, so we had to go back out to a tender again. I went back out to Torsion. We then designed the building around speaking to the gasworks site, and we always designed the building, with how it's going to be built on using the back road, the gasworks, as a delivery drop-off, and having cranes at the back. Having spoken to their team for several months, we'd always discussed there'd be some legal paperwork to pay, maybe a £10,000–15,000 agreement. It turned out basically that developers obviously don't like developers and wanted to charge us £600,000 for the benefit of leasing a dirt track to drop bricks. And so we then had to redesign the whole site with different pulley systems and the way we unload, and loading a tight site with 62 flats with one entrance, which is on Eboracum Way, proved just a non-starter. And we should have finished the site in March. Sorry, not March this year, sorry, May this year. I don't believe we'll get off site until March or April. During this process, the M&E contractor, who was the mechanical and plumbing contractor, went bust halfway through. So his wiring, I think, people don't like certifying other people's work. So that had to be taken out and redone. The cladding contractor went bust as well. That was a major issue. They designed it. We had to wait to get another design in. Torsion Construction were losing probably a couple of £1 million on the deal, and decided that it was better for us to sue them in 18 months, 2 years, once we got another contractor in to take over. The banks were putting major pressure on us to fund any contingency because the prices were just going through the roof. We had Brexit clauses, Corona clauses on delivery. And to be honest, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I got through the 2008, 2009 crash. I've never known anything like this in my life. I mean, the amount of bad luck on this site. And I've been speaking to Jonathan for a number of months, and the profit margin isn't really 8%. We're not making any money. It's purely basically we want to get our money that we invested into the site, back, and we're just struggling to make it work. The bank want us to put in £1.5 million over the next 3 months to basically prop up where we are. And we're probably looking at, from where we started in March 2020, we're looking at £2.5–3 million more than where we were. We had a forward sale on a PRS type environment. They were buying it. They pulled out, and we're now basically sort of looking at remarketing the site. And there's been a backlash. We still got 9 or 10 flats left on phase 1 to sell, and we've had a backlash basically from Corona. The only people who want to buy is investors. They want to do Airbnb. It's an overseas market, and at the moment, basically, it's just struggling to get traction in sales. We thought basically we made a breakthrough in August. We'd found an agent basically overseas, and suddenly, the mini budget happens, interest rate starts to rise, and it's just become a nightmare. The bank basically are just, they're being helpful, but they're also very concerned of their whole portfolio across most developers. So it's been a nightmare.
Okay. I was generous in giving you rather more than 3 minutes. No, it's not a problem. It's been helpful to hear what it is that's brought you to this point. When you refer to the mini budget, I mean, some of those things have been very, very recent, and certainly this application would have gone in before recent events the last week or two. It's more the mortgage, it's more the sales side, not the construction costs. It's more now, now we're nearing the end. Next year is now something trying to market them, and then thinking that we've got past a stage where people are obviously getting buy-to-let mortgages at 1.5–2%, and now you're looking at 5 and 6s, and it becomes the yield. People are nervous. They think the property's going to crash. Personally, I don't. I think that there's a huge shortage of supply over the next 2 or 3 years across the country, but it's making people very nervous, making mortgage companies very nervous. There's been 1,000 mortgages have gone, but they'll come back. I'm not painting a picture that's doom and gloom. I'll give members the opportunity to ask any questions they want to ask. Councillor Pavlovic, then Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few questions. I don't know if you want Councillor Fenton to go. No, you're happy for me to do it.
You might
Thank
not get
you.
all your questions.
All right. Well, we can mix and match. Yeah. Thank you. So, just to clarify in my own mind, you weren't the original applicant for this. So you bought this site with planning permission in place.
Yes.
So when you saw that this already had planning permission for 62 residential units, did you not, as part of the sort of due diligence process, think to yourself, how are we going to build this? And not anticipate that the access route that you didn't own might have been an issue?
Well, I'm presuming the group in front was North Star, right? And I don't know who is who. I've never met Paul Ellis. I've never met Paul Oxenby. I've spoken to Paul Oxenby on the phone, and never in 8-9 months did they ever mention a figure of £600,000 to have access. We were talking, the only issues they had is when they were going to clear the site with the gas pipes coming through, and it was never ever brought up. Now, I would never dream, right, in development of a dirt track, which has no material access to their site, and what they were doing, ever be charged a ransom strip to actually have lorries going in and coming out and being charged that amount of money. So it was never, you know, normally you would have, when I've worked with the likes of Paddock before and GMI, you've been on the similar side, it's always been you cover the legal costs, you cover drawing up the lease, the access requirements, never a ransom strip. I'd be very surprised if this committee ever heard of a ransom strip being charged for a delivery. Car parking, yes, and someone's car park, but not a delivery track.
Keep going.
Yeah, thanks. So you've sort of very eloquently relayed the tale of woe of the different contractors and the situation with the banks. But you also said that you've been in this business for 25 years, I think you said.
That's right.
Schemes go west, don't they? Not every scheme is going to work as well as you'd hoped.
I would say when you do a scheme, repair a scheme, you tend to have contingency in there. You tend to look at the worst case scenario. You look at today's prices, not 2 years' prices. You look at what you could earn, what you don't earn, and normally, you know, you would weigh up basically stuff going west, but never basically to the extent of this site. When we priced it originally, we told them we were circa probably just under £10 million. I think we're 9.8 to 10 million. We went to Torsion, we were probably £700,000 more than that, and it went up and up and up. And you know, during Corona, a lot of contractors got hit with Corona clauses, with force majeure, and all sorts. Now these were all unforeseen, so it wasn't as if we ignored everything. We didn't want to do a residential scheme. You know, we'd already basically been hurt with Icona 1 during Corona, where we didn't sell a single flat for nearly a year. You know, we were sat there, and if it, you know, we were absolutely up against it, not selling, no pre-sales, no nothing, thinking how we're going to sell, you know, get out of there. And I think we started, I think 2019 we started, and we've done 22 flats up until today in Icona 1, we call it, which is Redness Street. So it was bought as a student development. When we're doing Redness Street, we look basically at the IQ building next door, and we saw, and some of the students were walking past, and we're talking to them about pricing and delivery and what things were costing. And you know, we thought, what a great scheme. You know, you could charge £220 a week, you know, for a 250 square foot flat. We had some, Jonathan seen all the plans. We'd drawn up, I think 154 modular, we put, not modular, boxes in there. We'd had a gym in the basement. We'd had all sorts of stuff. That was that's what we bought it for. We never bought it basically thinking, oh, what we'll do is we'll do a viability study and try get rid of the affordable. Never in a million years did that, we weren't doing it. We weren't doing the resi side.
Can I just, one more? So if this reduction in section 106 for ostensibly the affordable housing isn't approved tonight, consequences?
Consequences, we can't afford basically to put any money in, right? And it's not I'm not here with a bowl. I'm not here, I'm 51 years old. I'm not here basically begging. These are the facts that we've got. I mean, we've got a number of schemes at the moment. We've got one in Leeds that we've knocked a building down. We were basically building 200 flats. The bill cost last year were 26.7 million. I've got a price come through on my phone today, 32. Right, the site's unviable. It's not even unviable with a viability study. It's just unviable. Full stop. The land's actually worth nothing. Central Leeds. It's actually a negative value because it can't be built. So we're having issues on every single site that we're doing based on your construction inflation, and it's not. And I don't believe developers are being greedy. I think there'll be over the next 6 to 9 months. I think there'll be a huge cull in contractors who can't finish jobs off because they can't afford to, and developers, going bust. And I think that it's not oh, let's be greedy and we want to get some more money out of the council, or we want to make more profit. It is what it is, and I don't want to sound arrogant because I'm not, but it's out there at the moment. It is the most horrendous time I've ever experienced in years. At least back in 2008, there was no money and you understood it. At the moment, there seems to be money around, but people aren't parting with it.
But it says, sorry, supplementary, can I just ask one supplementary question on that? So it says, though, that if we knock £1 million off your requirement for section 106, you're still making 8% yield on it.
No, I think that's wrong. On the viability, I could be wrong here, Jonathan, maybe, but on the viability appraisal, you put a land value in on a mechanism that isn't which isn't our land value. What we bought,
It's saying that you've overpaid, basically.
Yeah, the viability, they say this building, this land is worth, I could be wrong, 650,000. We paid 2.9 million for it. Okay, so what we're looking at doing is trying to get some of our capital that we put back in. Once the £1 million is gone, the bank will lend us that million to finish the job off. So it's not we're not, the profit margin on this isn't 8%. It's let's get, I said to Jonathan all along, we're trying to get our money back that we've invested into it, right, rather than actually lose the whole lot.
Councillor Fenton.
So just sort of building on the point about wanting to get your money out.
No money, sorry, not money out, just our equity that we put into originally, not profit, just.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in terms of other options for the site, what have you explored in terms of other ways in which you can move away from the site, given the issues it's caused in terms of registered providers, other potential uses for the site?
I think the registered providers would probably look at paying somewhere in the region of about 13-14 million for the site. I don't believe that even get over the bill cost. The bank, we've been speaking to the banker, the bank presently are speaking to us in a very formal way, and I think they've been talking to ID Planning in Leeds, and I think they're looking at their options if we fall off the cliff, what they would do. And I think what they're looking at doing is possibly turning it into an apart hotel. Not with us, because if we don't pay the contractor basically probably end of October, beginning of November, I think the bank basically will start getting very, very nervous. Even though we're nearly coming to the end of the development in February, March, they are getting incredibly nervous. And and the other avenues, you know, it seems to me at the moment, but York is heading towards a, you know, an Airbnb, you know, type city. The occupiers, the only occupiers that we were hoping to get just aren't there. A lot of the young people now want to live in the sticks. They want to live in a house. I think Corona basically has caused a few issues. No, you know, that's what we're finding, you know.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Young people can't afford to live near the city centre. It's not that we want to live in the sticks. We want to not drive and live environmentally friendly lives and be able to afford to live and have a family life, and that isn't possible in the city centre. But anyway, so you were saying you were initially hoping to develop it as a student development. Is that not the idea?
No.
So what's the nature of the development now? Is it buy to sell, buy to rent, short-term holiday let?
It's anybody, residential, anybody can buy. Anybody, a buy to let person can buy, residential can buy. It's a residential development.
Okay. So would it hypothetically be possible to, instead of buy to sell and be looking at the affordability of, you know, if you're selling now in the current market, look at buy to rent and have that long-term income and make the contributions in the future when you've had longer to have income coming in?
We've looked at this, and the cost of finance now against the rent. So unless I'm mistaken here, I think the average 2-bedroom flat in York is about £1,200 a calendar month in rent. I think the one bed is between £850 and £1,000 depending on where you are. And if you go through that and you look at the interest rates now, and even if you look at interest rates maybe back a year ago, it wouldn't cover most banks' threshold of what they need to achieve on that, even interest only. We looked at that. That was one of the, you know, we thought we'd keep it ourselves, but we just wouldn't, you know, you couldn't refinance it at the level like, to clear the bank off.
Any other questions? Councillor Pavlovic again.
You mentioned difficulties in pre-sale, off-plan sales. If this goes west and the bank decide on an apart hotel, what happens to all the people who've bought off-plan?
When I need people off plan.
Oh, I thought you said you already had some sales.
Oh no, we've had about 11 reservation fees on. 11 reservations. We haven't exchanged yet. When it started selling in August.
Oh right, so
Sorry.
you haven't actually sold anything.
No.
Right, good. Thanks.
Sorry, no.
No more questions. Thank you very much. What happens now is we have the opportunity, if we have any further questions, of the officers, and then members will discuss and come to a decision.
Do I go out or?
No, you can stay in the room,
okay.
but unfortunately, you
Can't talk.
yeah, you'll just have to.
Sorry. Okay.
You'll just have to watch us for a moment. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Do you want to maybe helpful if you just took a step back from the table? Thanks. That's great. Any questions of officers? Councillor Fenton.
So just picking up the point around potentially coming back as an apart hotel. If we refuse this application, what impact would that restore the affordable housing contribution to its previous level, or will it disappear entirely? How would that pan out?
The legal agreement as it's signed currently still stands, so that the developer or the landowner would be obliged to pay the contribution as it was originally in place. The issue about an alternative use, that would come forward in the form of a different application.
Councillor Warby.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to clarify, if we let them off, will they pay any affordable housing contribution? Because it says 1,940,000. So will they be paying 940? Oh, I see. Sorry, I didn't see that, but do apologise. I've already been answered. And has this happened before? Or are we setting a precedent there, please?
Not in my experience, we haven't had a scheme similar to this where we've granted permission and the agreement's been signed and we've come back to renegotiate while construction's been on site. We do sometimes change the agreements when developers have different relationships with different operators and they change the affordable housing offer because of the providers, but it's not usual that we get this sequence of events that leads to a position where we're making a recommendation to reduce the affordable housing offer, and we're at risk of a sort of site stalled and not being delivered. It's not one that I've come across before.
And we're not aware of others at the moment that are coming through with similar stories.
No, I mean, most of the applications recently that of this type of scale that we come to planning committee with is not usually for residential that often by a private developer. It's more tends to be hotels or purpose-built student accommodation, which doesn't have the requirement. I mean, the Barbican's an example of a site where we've had a large apartment scheme and nothing's been delivered. The only other similar scale city centre ones have been council delivery schemes, such as one on Piccadilly.
Councillor?
Thank you, Chair, and bear with me because this may take some sticking with. So on the basis that Trustonomics actually works and the extra £750,000 Premier League footballers are getting does start to cascade through, and we are suddenly enjoying our large pie. Well, these houses go through the roof in 6 months' time. There doesn't seem to be anything in here that allows us to claw any of that back. Assuming that.
No.
We haven't got that at the moment. No. Not in a similar way to the overage one on the previous scheme.
Supplementary is why.
Some of the information about the sales has updated. I think the last time I spoke with Mark, I got the understanding that potentially we were further on with sales. So as he said, that's just recently fell through, but I thought we were going to be in a position at committee where investors had agreed to purchase much of the units already. So it wouldn't be likely that because the scheme could potentially be finished in about a year's time. I didn't think we'd be looking at something further down the line where sales have changed, but it does seem that he's not as far on with sales as we thought. So I don't see why it's something we couldn't work on yet.
Okay. I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor DeGoy. Councillor Pavlovich. Councillor Malley.
I was just wondering, because there's quite a few different areas of the Section 106 agreement, how the decision was made that the reduction in the contribution should come solely from affordable housing and not from any of the other areas. And if, the applicant's claiming there's evidence that young people don't want to live in this location, does that mean that the education area of it needs to be reassessed? I'm just wondering how that decision was reached, please.
In terms of I think the reason why this tends to be the approach that if viability is looked at, the affordable housing is the first thing that suffers is because of the general approach that the other obligations that are required in the legal agreement to meet the planning tests, they have to be necessary and directly related to the scheme. So that the recommendation is that the scheme isn't appropriate. It's not providing the appropriate infrastructure for its future occupants without the other list of obligations. And that's the sort of process that we go through, why it's the affordable housing one that is adjusted before the other obligations.
Okay, Councillor Pavlovich, then Councillor DeGoy, then Councillor Fisher.
Thanks. Got a couple of questions, surprise, surprise. Well, I'm fresh to this meeting, so yeah, I've not been ground down by the past 4 hours. So paragraph 2.2, can you just explain to me what that actually means? There's a lot of words, but I'm not sure I actually understand the gist of what point it is that you're trying to make. The potential risk to developers is already accounted for in the assumptions for developer return and viability assessment. Realization of risk. There's not a full stop in this. Realization of risk does not in itself necessitate a further viability assessment or trigger a review mechanism. What does all that mean?
I maybe should have thrown it into the preceding paragraph, but it's generally around the whole approach to viability, and that when you're looking at a viability appraisal, you've usually got contingency, which allows some certain degree of flexibility for costs going east or west.
Yeah.
But the rest of the commentary goes on to the next paragraph, if I've written it properly.
So it's about land. It's about land value.
It explains this. Yeah, it does explain the wider circumstances where we can entertain again revisiting the planning obligation.
So then in paragraph 2.8, you say that the NPPG advises that under no circumstances will the price paid for land be relevant justification for failing to accord with the relevant policies. And you then further gone on to say that the reason that the viability of this is not being met is because this developer has overpaid.
No,
Is that not what you meant?
No, the district valuer has done the independent valuation, has approached it in a certain way. When she's put all the inputs in, an input isn't the 2.9 million that the developer paid for the site. The input was what she regards to be a realistic land value. So that's not that price paid for the site has not influenced the viability appraisal. That's not what's making it unviable. It's the construction costs. So when the viability appraisal is done, the land value has had a value of 250,000, I think it was the input for the land value.
Right.
So it's significantly less than what was actually paid for it. So that's the thing. In reality, the developer is making less than what the viability appraisal churns out because the site has been overpaid for. But it doesn't affect the outcome.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
So,
but that's not skewing
question.
our viability appraisal.
Yeah. So final question. You've taken a seemingly face value that the only other uses for this site would be student accommodation or an apartment type hotel. And I think somebody asked, I think it's Councillor Fenton, asked the question, have you not considered RPs or anybody else to build it as a residential development? I mean, why have you just assessed that it can only be one of two things, either PBSA or an apart hotel?
That's on the back of the conversation with the developer in terms of the way his deal is financed. It's reliant upon the banks releasing the funding, and if he can't pay back the banks, they will repossess the site essentially, and that's come from the dialogue that we've had around that scenario.
This site.
No, that's not what that's not what Jonathan's saying. We based it on the evidence that we've been given from the applicant. They obviously have to take into account what the bank, if exactly what Jonathan just said. So if the bank take it back, they're up to them what they will then develop it for. And the information they've given us is that the bank would then develop it for either a part hotel or student accommodation.
It would, but it would be within the ownership of the bank at that point, wouldn't it?
Sorry, can I just ask for clarity? Is it the bank that's giving you that information or the applicant?
Bank, if I remember, but we did ask for this because I made a point of this.
Well, it's what I've been advised from the developer, and we have had pre-application inquiries about that use as well.
Councillor Fisher?
Thank you. If we can just clarify then, if somebody else was to take over the site and came back with an application for an apart hotel, we would lose all affordable housing completely. Thank you.
You wanted to ask something relevant to this, Councillor Melly? Okay. Again, on this, Councillor Cobain.
Sorry, Becky, I thought you said, Becky, that the bank had told you that it would be, that you'd had a conversation with the bank, and Jonathan, you seem to be saying that you had the conversation with the applicant. Which one is it?
Sorry, I thought we had.
No, sorry, the conversations we've had have been with the developer, and as I say, the bank have put pre-application inquiries in about alternative uses that could go within the approved shell.
Councillor?
So as I understood it, the suggestion was that the registered provider wouldn't pay enough to cover what is owed to the bank, so the bank wouldn't accept that. Is that what I took from that conversation?
No, I think this is from what Mark said when he was asked the question. I think that was, in his opinion, if a registered provider was looking at the sites, they would only value it at, I think he said, about 13 or 14 million, which barely covers the construction costs that have already been incurred. So i.e. it wouldn't happen.
At which point the bank would foreclose on them.
Yeah, and they would look at a use which had the highest value, which is not residential.
Councillor Dugon, you've been patient as always.
Okay. It is on this theme, just to note, paragraph 3.1 does actually answer that question about the district valuer and the profit, which was referred to earlier on. I think that helps. My question was going to be that we've heard that the alternative use might be a part hotel or some sort of buy-to-let sort of arrangement. If we were to approve this, is there any way in which we could condition, or is it already within the existing planning consent that it should be, that the properties should be for sale for use as a principal residence as opposed to buy-to-let or second homes?
Well, no, because you just vary in the 106. You're not reissuing the decision.
No, I'm just trying to clarify.
Sorry.
The original decision did that. If that said that, then it's fine. But if not, can we, in order to ensure that, or to reassure us that that these houses are going to be for people to live in as opposed to second homes, can we make that a condition of the variation?
No, because you vary in the 106. You're not varying the original permission.
Okay.
Councillor Cobain.
Well, presumably we could if the developer agreed to it. Just like what happened in the last episode.
But we're varying a 106. You've already got the permission in place. This is a deed of variation, which is different.
Yeah, but he's asking us for £1 million, and what we're saying is we want something back for that. So if he agreed to it being primary residential only, then it might ease the decision for people.
You would need to have the evidence base to have that, because it's in the same use class. As we've had these discussions before around second homes. We can't, without the evidence base to say why this site specifically needed to do that, we couldn't.
Well, even though he's asking us for £1 million.
But it's got to be planning based. We've got to make a planning evidence based decision and
Yeah.
we just,
Well, we didn't in the last application. We just took them at their word that they said we've got the money in the bank and that'll be fine. We were specifically told that could not be a planning consideration, but we still accepted it.
don't understand.
I think the question was asked and the question was answered. Councillor Fisher.
No.
Okay. You had indicated earlier, Councillor Fisher. Oh, okay. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of, there's quite a lot of different factors here that have increased the costs. And in terms of which ones have been included in the calculations and which ones haven't, paragraph 2.6 is about extra costs incurred related to the stability of a boundary wall. Was that included in the calculation?
That was one of the costs that was looked at as a development cost. It's not in itself significant. It's sort of in the tens of thousands of pounds, the cost of stabilizing that wall. One of the key costs around that area was the excavation and the remediation of that part of the works. But yeah, the boundary wall was not a big significant cost.
Supplementary?
Keep going.
Yeah, so is that not the sort of thing that usually would be at the buyer's risk? And the sort of thing that would be reasonable to incorporate into whatever financial risk assessment, viability assessment you do? Like usually, yeah, something like that is at buyer's risk. That's why you get a comprehensive survey done. It's not something that's usually at the people of York's risk. Like other things, like construction costs going up by significantly more than historical trends and, you know, a global pandemic, you know, it's not reasonable to factor into the original viability assessment, but something like the stability of a boundary wall just seems like a normal part of the risk of buying real estate.
No, I think, yeah, I think you're right. And if it was just that item in isolation, it's the kind of thing that the contingency would have allowed for. As I say, that cost isn't of any type of level. All these small things add up, but it wasn't a significant thing that affected the costs.
Okay. Councillor Pavlik.
Thanks. In 211, page 4, Jonathan, you've said the increased construction costs mean the developer profit is at around 8% if the planning obligation is reduced to £1 million. We heard from the developer that that's completely wrong. Where did you get it from? And do you stand by it? No, it's the developer profit. No.
That the 8% is based on if the developer had paid 250,000 for the land, they would make 8% profit. What the
I don't
developer
think
was
that's
saying,
what it says. I don't think that's what it says.
developer says he's paid 2.9.
Can we allow Jonathan to
Yeah.
clarify that?
That's correct to a degree. The developer's not in full agreement with the viability appraisal, the assessor's costs, quite a few aspects of it. One of the things they don't agree with is the land value. There are other things they don't agree with, but it's correct that yes, that 8% profit is on the basis that the land is worth £250,000.
Okay.
and not what they paid for.
Not what they paid for.
Which was considerably more.
Yeah.
Councillor Eyre.
Two questions, and I'm not sure whether you can answer or not, but I suppose it comes down to that. I take on board what the developer was saying, and I appreciate that there has been a period of flux and a lot of things that none of us could have predicted. But it does feel like one person's done quite well out of this in terms of selling a piece of land that's worth 250,000 for the best part of £3 million. Are we 100% certain that there's nothing going on there? I suppose in terms of the best thing, because it's quite easy to have a subsidiary company, for example, and sell a land, say, well, I'll give you 2.9 million for land. That's it. I'm walking away with 2.7 there, and then I'll come back and say I can't afford to develop it. It is a way of moving money around the system.
Not to mention a ransom strip of 800,000.
But they may buy it for themselves. You never know from that point of view. That £1 million of affordable housing to me seems to have gone into the hands of a landowner, and I'm not comfortable as to why they got 2.5 and whether that was entirely appropriate. That was one I don't think you can answer.
I think no. I mean, that's why we have an independent viability appraisal that looks at things independently and hypothetically, and that's why, for the purpose of the viability appraisal, the land's only being valued at £250,000 and not £2.9 million, and it's still come out with the conclusion that because the construction costs are so high that there isn't the money in the scheme left.
I knew you weren't going to answer that one. I suppose my next one was that one about parking, which are page 3, power 2.6. So there's no figures to it, but it does say that, as noted, the car parking for the residential if it's, can't remember, I sure it must have been on the planning application, but I'm assuming that's ground floor parking instead of residential or commercial. Was no consideration given to whether you could remove the parking, go entirely car free, and have additional residential or commercial that would allow us to get the extra £1 million out.
It's kind of lower ground floor, and that's part and parcel why it raises viability issues. So it's hard to, it certainly wouldn't really be usable as residential. It'd probably be hard to use it for any other use. Highways said that we're insistent on the time that it was necessary. So when you do the viability, there's a certain value you get out of the car parking, which I think was about £500,000 value was given to the car parking. But the costs of doing the excavation to facilitate it and the implications, the things that brought up around contamination, etc. I mean, it doesn't stack up.
Surely the building's on top of the parking, you wouldn't.
I think as you sign the previous application, once you start going down, costs go up.
Can we say it's a queue park for £1 million?
Are there any other questions of officers?
Yeah, just a point of fact, I think there's also floodplain issues because it's close to the River Foss. Was it not?
It is in flood zone 2, so
Yeah.
it will have had to have
So
been
you'd
at a
have to-
certain
so you couldn't have it for
level.
residential at below floor level.
Yeah, yes, yeah, correct.
I think we've probably exhausted the questions of officers. So, over to members. Councillor Melly.
I think when this development was originally approved, it was only considered acceptable, appropriate, whatever development subject to these, conditioned on these contributions. It wouldn't have been legally possible to initially impose these Section 106 contributions unless they were necessary to make the development acceptable, and I don't see what's changed. The argument that it's not viable and so therefore, more than £1 million less towards affordable housing should be paid, and the reason why it's not viable is because young people don't want to live in the area. But the reason that young people can't live in the area is because of the lack of affordable housing. Just seems so ridiculous. But as far as I can tell, it meets the policy. Everything under the policy has been carried out properly in terms of all the assessments, and that has come back saying that it meets the policy, and so therefore it's acceptable to pay less in Section 106 contributions, as ridiculous as it is. So I'm happy to move officer recommendation.
Councillor Fisher.
It's not a very satisfactory position. As I see it, we've got a choice. We either collect half of something, or if it goes in a part hotel, 100% of absolutely nothing. And quite frankly, I'd rather have 800,000 of affordable housing rather than risk it, the whole scheme crashing. But we get another apart hotel, which I think we've got staggering numbers of, and getting no affordable housing at all. I think the people of York wouldn't thank us if we threw away that 800,000 quid.
Councillor Pavlovec.
I'm taking a slightly different perspective on this. Two things. One, nature of capitalism. You make bad business decisions, you lose money. It is not the council's job to bail bad business decisions out to the tune of £1 million. Secondly, we have nothing other than what the developer has said, which Jonathan seems to have accepted at face value, that the only alternatives for this building are an apart hotel. If the bank, if it is foreclosed and the banks sell, they will sell to whoever it is that wants to buy it. The development is already partially up as residential units. It would make sense for it to continue to be residential units. I don't see why a registered provider wouldn't be interested in it. And the basic principle is, I do not see that the council should be subsidising poor decision making and saying you can have £1 million towards additional profit. So no, I won't be supporting the proposal.
Councillor Gordon.
I'm persuaded by the arguments of Councillor Fisher on this one. I mean, 800,000 or 881,000 towards affordable housing is better than the scenario which seems pretty clear, that the alternative is that the current developer loses out and someone else comes along and says the only viable option now is in a part hotel. So, you know, I think we don't, you know, difficult as it is, we don't want to give up with the money which was agreed, but I think we do have to go with the recommendation.
Councillor Luca.
I've listened to all this very carefully. I'm with Councillor Pavlovich on this. I thought this was the whole essence of market capitalism, that you stood or fell. I thought that was the lesson that we've just been listening to at the Conservative Party conference, that if we don't enjoy and take the risks of market capitalism, we all turn into terribly, terribly difficult people and make England a terribly bad place. So I think this is, I think it's a smattering of blackmail as well. We are merely being told by the developer that that's all the other options for it. We don't know. As Councillor Pavlovich said, my banks aren't fools. They'll sell it to somebody who wants it at a reasonable price. And I think they will, you know, in some ways, they'll just want to clear their losses. So I don't see why we should believe that the only alternative is an apart hotel or student accommodation. I think, yeah, okay, it's a bit of a gamble, but personally, I can't see why, as a council, we have to bail the developer out. Heavens above, at the rate things are going, these applications will be coming thick and fast. We'll be asked to bail out all sorts of people. Profit margins must be going haywire. Opportunities to sell must be going haywire. I mean, where do we finish? Do we end up giving everybody a couple of million just to say, oh, please, please, please get on and build whatever? So no, I can't support this application. It's tough and I'm really very sorry. But I don't see why it is in the council's job to support, as Councillor Pavlovich said, what seems to have been a very poorly thought through decision. And a lot of the costs and extra things that the developer was talking about when he addressed us are actually much more recent than were, some of them are reflecting the last 3 weeks. So I really do think we are being given a bit of a sob story. And personally, I think I'm not prepared to agree.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre, then Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I enjoyed this time talking about district, these mystical figures that are district valuers. I've never met a district valuer, right? I can't expect they live on some sort of hill and they just suddenly decide the value of everything without ever being seen. That's something. But I have to assume they're incredibly professional and they know what they're doing and they're evidence-based and they produce these reports, of which we've had a chance to read 2 different versions today that told us 2 different stories, but that's one of those interesting things. So I am happy with what District Valuer says. I do have issues. I take on board what Councillor Pavlovich has said. It does irk me significantly, but I know on the Persimmon site of the Barbican is classic about that. We have a massive issue in this country with land banking. And as Councillor Lucker said, oh, banks will do the best, they'll sell it. I don't necessarily isn't always the case. They will want to get the best they possibly can for assets. Capitalists always want to get the best they possibly can for assets. So when they do not deem the time of the market is right, they're quite happy to sit on assets for as long as possible until such time. 10, 12 years Persimmons and they're still not remotely interested in bringing that one forward. In terms of developer, I'm always skeptical. I don't think they are making any money off this. I get the sense that they are pretty much walking away. They may well be taking a loss on this particular development. Over the grand scheme of things, they have multiple developments. We had talked about ones in Leeds. They'll come out on top across this one. This is one that they're having to say, well, you know what? We just need to get out of this one as quickly as possible and lose as little as possible. People that do lose, Councillor, look, I agree, is the people of York, I suppose, and the council, but that is the nature of capitalism. That's the way things go. It is always us. The capitalists will always gain from that system, but we will lose. We can't change that overnight, and we can't change that on this particular decision as well. As I've said, as we saw with the stadium, with the pension companies are quite happy to sit on empty restaurant units at the stadium for 10 to 15 years because they're not happy with the current rates of return. It's small peanuts to them in terms of their overall portfolios to sit on a particular site for 5-6 million quid for the next 10 years if they think they'll make 30 million out of it at the end of that period. So we've always seen evidence that they're happy to sit on that one. And I think the biggest indictment that I will go is this entirely flawed system about trying to deliver affordable housing through percentage contributions on private developers. It hasn't worked. It has never worked. It's a silly way to do things. And in essence, we're not taking £1 million off them. It's that system of saying, well, actually, we're going to take some of that profit away from you to deliver affordable housing. If the profit goes, the affordable housing goes. That's the stupidity of the whole affordable housing system. So I hate doing it, but based on the things, I think it's the only thing we can possibly do today.
Councillor Wardby. Sorry, Councillor Fenton, then Councillor Ward.
Councillor Eyre made the point I was going to make about the current section 106 arrangements.
Sorry, mine was just a query. Was there a condition, we were changing a condition or not? Was that? No, it wasn't. It was, yeah, if that can, and we weren't doing that. That's okay. I'm mindful to approve. Thank you. Oh, but yeah.
So we would need to be clear about that when it comes to, okay. Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, that was my question really. Can we put in that condition that if the flats do start to make profit, that money is put straight back into the affordable housing rather than taken by the developer in this case?
It's not a condition, it's part of the 106, and yes, you can do that if you
okay, so
see, but you'd need to make that clear when you come to the recommendation.
okay.
Can I propose we do that then?
Would you like to do that?
I'll second it.
Would you do that for me, please, Councillor?
Can I formally propose what I just said, Chair?
Can I formally second that?
Okay, thank you. So, Becky, bearing in mind what we were just saying about the overage, can you just clarify what we would then be voting on?
So you're voting to vary the section 106 as outlined in the report, but you would also like to add an overage clause into the 106, which would look at the profit made once the development is finished and sold, and whether or not we can get affordable housing at that point. Okay.
Go ahead.
Does that clause, can it only ever lead to an increase in the contribution, never a decrease? If it turns out that it's even less profitable than the current viability assessment leads, could it lead to even less?
We will write it in a way that it would work that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is an absolute bottom basement of how much we'll get. It won't decrease from this overage.
Councillor Cabay.
You know, in that case, I'd be happy to support on the basis that a bird in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. But we have to point out the irony of the fact that the previous applicant who told us they couldn't possibly afford any affordable housing for the city with a multi-million-pound development that suddenly found an extra £4 million for archaeology, were charging this applicant 600 grand to drive down the back of their building. Stinks.
Okay, well, we've had a Councillor de Gourd.
In terms of this proposed condition, sorry,
It's not a
whatever,
condition, don't say
overage,
condition.
whatever you could, terming it, additional elements of the proposal. I'll be unhappy about it only being done at the end of the sale of the whole site. I would suggest it 50% of the sale, and then again at the when it's completely sold or whatever. Yeah, but I'm just concerned that what happened,
Don't-
yeah.
I think you can use, just to come in on that, you don't usually do overage on a site more than once. If it, that's usually when you get to like 300-400 dwellings. This is only, how many, 86, 62. So there's not really enough there for you to go and get that halfway through. If it was 400, I'd be like, yes, absolutely, halfway through do it. But because it's a low number, it would make sense to do it at the end.
Okay, thank you.
I'd probably need the end wording of the overage to be delegated to officers, because I don't know how it'll work exactly.
Councillor Melly?
Yeah, we also need the wording to make it clear that they can't just never sell that final flat, because the profit from selling that is less than the amount they'd have to pay in section 106. It needs to be worded to not have loopholes like that in it. Yeah.
We'll have to we'll speak to legal and all the relevant bodies to make sure we secure that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Are we ready to take a vote on that? Yeah. So going with the officer's recommendation, but with this additional note in terms of overage having been proposed and seconded, can I ask you to indicate if you would support that? We did.
Who was the second one?
Councillor,
Thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Just because there's no hand. Yeah, thank you.
Any who would like to vote against that? And that means there are no abstentions. So, thank you, members. Thank you. Thank you for those who joined us for the second shift. Thank you even more to those who've done the long haul. There are no urgent items of business.